Well, here we are. We're doing the CES letter review, and we're on segment number 7. Part 7 is going to be about the priesthood restoration concerns and questions, and hopefully also get into the witnesses of the Book of Mormon, the 11 witnesses, the 3 and the 8. So, because these are big deals, and there's a lot here that is not very in line with what we've been told in the missionary discussions or the gospel essentials class or any other class, gospel doctrine, Sunday school, etc. So Jeremy's bringing up some things here in the priesthood restoration aspect, and I'll probably go along with what he says pretty well here. I'm going to disagree probably a lot on the next thing in various aspects with the 12 witnesses and Jeremy's view on that. In some things, however, I think in the end we're both going to agree that the validity or weight of their witness is on very shaky ground, no matter how you look at it. So, here we go. Priesthood restoration. So, basically, he's quoting, to start off here, Richard Bushman, who's a patriarch in the church, and somewhat of an LDS historian, and he wrote Rough Stone Rolling, which is basically as honest as you can get about what happened without getting excommunicated. That's how I'm going to call it, Richard Bushman, even though I've just read a bunch of excerpts over time, and I haven't actually read Rough Stone Rolling. A loved one says he intends to read that. Bushman makes it possible for some people to hang on to their faith with his apologetics is the way it sounds, but he's a little bit on the honest side, and that's rough for apologists. Alright, looks like we got a battery concern. I will be plugging in right now. Should be charging up. Okay, sorry about that. Alright, so what's Bushman have to say? The late appearance of these accounts raises the possibility of later fabrication. That's a pretty heavy-duty thing for a patriarch to say. I wonder what he thinks when he puts his hands on somebody's head. Is he truly inspired, and does he have the holy priesthood? When apparently Joseph and Oliver Cowdery made this stuff up years later and then rewrote various revelations. Starting off, we got the Book of Commandments, which most of us haven't even read. And why is that? Well, it got trashed. It got trashed when? Why? Well, they might tell us that, the mobs destroyed some copies and that sort of a thing, but the fact of the matter is that in addition to that sort of thing happening, Joseph and Oliver rewrote certain revelations and made things look as though John the Baptist had appeared to them in earlier writings when they had never referenced that, or that Peter, James, and John had appeared to them to give them the Melchizedek priesthood. But none of this appears in the Book of Commandments, which I guess was originally published in about 1833, it says here. So I wonder why that would be. It just wasn't there. Additionally, Oliver Cowdery was publishing the Evening and Morning Star here, and he was publishing, the church's history in it. And I guess this was in like 1835 or so, but there's no mention of this priesthood stuff, evidently. Just like there's no mention from Oliver Cowdery there of Joseph Smith having this 1820 version of this first vision we read about. Oliver Cowdery never published that. In fact, nobody published anything about that until like 1842. That's right. So all the people joining the church, as people know who have watched my first vision videos, realize that these people were not joining on this first vision story that we hear of. Joseph's family had obviously never heard of it. We look at the testimonies they give of what was going on with their family. They started, getting involved with spiritual revivals and stuff in 1823, not 1819 or 1820. And there's nothing about this vision there. And there's nothing about these visions with John the Baptist or Peter, James, and John. Nobody knew about it. And then so Jeremy also mentions here that David Whitmer, one of the three witnesses of the Book of Mormon, in an interview stated he'd never heard of this priesthood restoration. You know, he didn't know about it. So says Whitmer, I never heard that an angel had ordained Joseph and Oliver to the Aronic priesthood until the year 1834, 1835. And, you know, they're trying to tell us it happened like in 1829, right? Or 1836 in Ohio. I do not believe that John the Baptist ever ordained Joseph and Oliver. And elsewhere I read, I believe it was William McClellan, who was one of the 12 apostles. He was an apostle, but he didn't realize that that involved priesthood. He didn't realize he had the Melchizedek priesthood because no one ever conferred the Melchizedek priesthood on him. They just made him an apostle. Never heard of such a thing. And he's said that in an interview. Don't have that reference here, but I've mentioned that elsewhere, and I'm sure you can look it up online if you want to. So, looks like everything points to them basically backdating a bunch of stuff, rewriting some revelations, backdating them, and then putting them in the Doctrine and Covenants and printing that and trashing the Book of Commandments. Nice. Yeah. Sound a little sketchy? Well, seems like that's kind of the way a lot of things have happened in church history. This 1842 version of the first vision business, the first thing we see even printed, I think. Actually, Oliver Cowdery said something like, it was Rigdon, was aware that some business had gotten out about it. I think in 1835 he said, those first things, and they weren't referring to any God the Father and Jesus vision, by the way. But they talked about him being like 15 and 16 years old and seeing Jesus, whatever. And he said, that's all a bunch of baloney. First guy he saw was an angel. And he was 17, so that's the one we call the angel Moroni, although most of the references to that have him as Nephi, by Joseph Smith, and except for a couple between 1835 and 1838. Then he went back to the Nephi thing. So, Oliver Cowdery is a great, he tells us a lot. In fact, on that first vision business also, he says Joseph Smith was engaged in praying at that time, in 1823, to find out whether or not a supreme being existed, and if he approved of him. Obviously, he wouldn't be doing that if he'd seen God 3 years earlier, now would he? Okay, so anyway, that's what Jeremy's got to say on that, and backdating and rewriting history, Joseph Smith, 101. All right, the next one we got here is witnesses, concerns, and questions. You know, the 3 witnesses and the 8 witnesses. And so Jeremy's bringing up some stuff here. And we're going to disagree on his worldview versus mine. He seems to discredit anyone who believes in the spiritual world or who has experienced anything. He just thinks they're delusional and they should be on some kind of psychotropic drugs or something, is the way it sounds like to me. But he is talking about Martin Harris, who especially there, who besides the fact that he was a visionary man like unto Lehi, he bore witness, fervent testimony, and went on missions for various churches. So he not only may have had visions or said that he had visions, which is fine, but he seemed to be convinced that various religions were the one true church. And so as soon as he finds out his second one that he was sure was the one true church, he's figuring out that he's got a problem with whatever his spiritual sourcing is on validity of who's got a one true church. So anyway, he gets into this, and they're talking about these guys, and let's see what he's got to say. Magical worldview. All right, so his deal is, he thinks that that's a 19th century thing, or anybody's kind of nuts if they believe that they can, do anything that's called magical or have visions, or, apparently Jeremy, he doesn't have friends or hasn't experienced, remote viewing or astral projection or, clairvoyance, or all kinds of things that people either consider supernatural or magic. Or what about people who have near-death experiences? And everybody, there's a lot of scientific people try to say that's all about the brain. But when these people testify of events that they saw in remote locations when they were out of their body, with regard to people, they know, loved ones and so forth, and the loved ones actually said, yeah, actually, I did do that exactly as you said, and I was nowhere near where your body was. I was in another room, I was in another location. These people were out of body, apparently. They were able to view these things, people's actions. And there are, thousands and thousands of people that, not only of people that have had, NDEs, but people that do remote viewing, or even do, other things, astral projection and that sort of thing. So, I disagree with Jeremy. I know plenty of people that have actually conversed with individuals from the unseen world face to face, and had physical things happen, caused by unseen beings. So, and they're not, delusional people. And many people have experiences in the temple. People I know have conversed with loved ones face to face, in some instances in the temple. Sometimes they did not view them. Sometimes they did. So there are a lot of people that have seen things, but usually they can differentiate and say something like, I saw them, they were from the spiritual world, or maybe someone saw a vision, they were doing remote viewing. That's different from what's going on here with the three witnesses, because see, Joseph Smith actually possessed some kind of plates, okay? And people were allowed to touch them, and some of them picked them up, and they're underneath a cloth, but they couldn't see them. And they probably weren't going to look like gold, because gold would weigh about 200 pounds, not 40 pounds, so I hate to mention that he lived really close to a tin shop where they could have made these things out of tin, and some ignorant people, possibly not realizing that those dimensions of gold would weigh, a whole lot more than tin would weigh. And so they've got these plates, supposedly, at Joseph Smith's house. People have felt them, that kind of a thing. But no, they have to go out into the woods to see them when they're at his house. I mean, he could just say, hey, guys, I'll tell you what. Here are the plates. You can look at them, check them out. The three witnesses, right? And all the other witnesses, too. You can check them out. You can touch them, mess with them, and then let's pray and see if an angel wants to appear to us on top of all this, right? But no, they have to go out in the woods, and the angel appears, supposedly, to Oliver Cowdery, David Whitmer, and Joseph Smith after Martin Harris left because nothing was going on, so he thought he was unworthy. And they say that they saw a vision. They had a vision, so that's nice. And the vision shows that they see an angel and hear a voice, and they see some plates. Okay, great. I don't know all the intricacies of that, but if Joseph Smith had plates at his house, that's ridiculous. And that's also a point that Jeremy makes, and I have to agree on that. That's just, ridiculous. Same thing kind of happens, with Martin Harris. Joseph goes and finds him, and he's over somewhere praying, and then says he has a spiritual experience. But when Martin Harris is asked, did you actually see them with your regular eyes or something? He's like, no, I saw them with my spiritual eyes. So was he having a, it's not remote, that wouldn't be remote viewing, because the angel was supposedly right there. I'm not exactly sure what he's talking about, but he differentiated that between, if you or I were there speaking with him. So in the way that he responded to the foreman at the printer shop who asked him if he saw him, and he said no, he saw him with his spiritual eyes. Well, I know plenty of people that have seen, spiritual people from the spiritual world, and they did not say, I saw him with my spiritual eyes. They said, they were standing there just like you and me, talking to me, and then they vanished. And that has happened in the temple with many people, and yes, I do know people personally that have had that happen. So, and had information given that was important and true and checked out, and a lot of people's lives have been saved. All kinds of things have happened. So if you don't believe in that, you don't have to. That's what this is about is the fact that the church is using stuff for evidence that is really not valid. It doesn't make any sense. So they pretended that they saw him physically, but actually they didn't. In addition to that, of course, apparently these guys were not excited about signing on the dotted line that they'd seen this. So what does that tell us, you know? What does it tell us when the 8 witnesses did not want to sign? Now, it sounds to me like Martin Harris is saying they actually did sign, but I believe all the signatures are actually in the handwriting of Oliver Cowdery. Yeah, the charger wasn't working there. So, yeah, if we look at the signatures, I believe that the statement has been made that, you know, they've been examined and they were all the same handwriting. It was Oliver Cowdery, and none of these guys actually signed these. They didn't give individual, you know, testimonies of what their experience was. There's just one generic thing made, makes it look like they all physically saw the plates, and, well, evidently they couldn't make their own testimony. Their own testimony was like you'd see on some sort of a product, trying to get a third-party endorsement. We just don't have a whole lot of elements that look reliable or honest, so, or logical. If he's got the plates at his house, you know, again, why do we have to see this in vision? These guys basically said it was kind of a vision thing too. Why would they need a vision if he's got them at his house? Because they weren't gold. That's why. It's hard to make tin look like gold, so you can just feel them through a cloth. This guy's ridiculous. I mean, seriously, if we look at what Joseph Smith did, as far as trying to convince people that he had these plates and all the hoops people have to jump through, why not just show them the darn plates? Obviously, he couldn't pick them up unless he's like Hulk Hogan. I mean, 200-pound plates, give me a break. He gave us the dimensions. They would have weighed 200 pounds or something close to that, not like 40 pounds. Ridiculous. And he ran through the woods for like 3 miles and knocked people out that were trying to, you know, get the plates from him. All these things we see in the church movies. Ridiculous. So let's really go over a little bit more about these special witnesses that were employed by Joseph Smith to testify that they had seen physical evidence, or purportedly physical evidence, I mean golden plates, which later we find out they said they spiritually saw, even though he had plates in his house that they got to touch, you know, but they weighed like 40 pounds instead of 200, right? If they were gold plates and he had them in his house, we ask, why didn't he show them? We've got all these witnesses, but they didn't witness anything. They didn't witness golden plates that they could pick up, which would be too heavy for them. They didn't, everything that they, and they didn't sign anything. We have Oliver Cowdery writing their names in. In the Book of Mormon, we think these guys signed something, but they didn't. You know? It's ridiculous. And when we look at the reputation of the 3 witnesses, we've got, you know, Martin Harris going after all sorts of, you know, 9 or 10 different churches. Okay, we've got, did I say that? Yeah, it was Martin Harris. And then we've got all 3 of these guys following the girl with the seer stone, the 16-year-old girl with the seer stone, when Joseph and Rigdon took off for Canada after the Kirtland, you know, anti-banking safety society failed. So they're all following this girl with the seer stone. At least 2 of them followed along with, you know, Joseph Smith's family and the patriarch of the church and the, you know, the state president of Zion, or not Zion, but, you know, Nauvoo. You know, everybody was following James Strang. And I think a lot of them hated Brigham. You know, and Strang, he said he had plates like Joseph Smith and interpreted them and all that kind of stuff. And same kind of a thing. And then we've got these statements. Joseph Smith knocks all of these guys, and so did Rigdon. Rigdon says that, you know, they were counterfeiters and thieves. He's talking about Cowdery. That's the same thing that Joseph Jackson said, that Joseph Smith and all the apostles except for Heber Kimball and Orson Pratt were involved in, with a big counterfeiting operation in Nauvoo, along with the spiritual wife system, the Danites, and the Council of 50. So if you read, all these guys, they're all talking trash about each other. Rigdon says these guys are trash. You know, the 3 witnesses, you know, they say that Joseph Smith's an adulterer, or at least, you know, Cowdery and Whitmer sure did. He says that they're all trash. Joseph Smith says, you know, what does he call them? Black legs. And I mean, these are his prime witnesses, and he trashes each and every one of these guys. It's ridiculous. I mean, what if... All of them were excommunicated within 8 years. What if that was happening, now with Thomas Monson and Dieter Uchtdorf, and everybody's telling everybody that the other guy's just a piece of trash, a counterfeiter, a thief, trying to do anything he can to bilk the saints. I mean, this is your first presidency. The guy with integrity was William Law, the one who said, Joseph Smith is an adulterer, and printed section 132 in the Expositor, and the fact that Joseph was practicing adultery and went after his wife too. So there's zero credibility with these people. None. There we go. Let's read a quote from Sidney Rigdon about Oliver Cowdery. He calls him a lying, thieving, counterfeiting man who was united with a gang of counterfeiters, thieves, liars, and blacklegs in the deepest dye to deceive, cheat, and defraud the saints out of their property by every art and stratagem which wickedness could invent. That's almost exactly what Joseph Jackson said all of those guys were up to. All right. Such characters as John Whitmer, David Whitmer, Oliver Cowdery, and Martin Harris are too mean to mention, and we had liked to have forgotten them. That's Joseph Smith having to say about his own witnesses. Oh, gosh. So he's just discredited his own witnesses that he went to all that trouble to have these guys witness for him, and that's in the history of the church. I mean, they each do the best they can to destroy each other's credibility. Can we imagine this now with Dieter and Thomas Monson and Henry B. Eyring all saying that the other guys were counterfeiters, all in the mafia or something, and liars, cheaters, adulterers. These guys are ridiculous. And of course, if you do check out the spiritual wife system, oh my gosh. Okay, so there's no power besides the power of God that can cause this gift. Okay, he's talking about the gift of Aaron, the rod of Aaron. Another thing that was changed in the Doctrine and Covenants, because Oliver Cowdery, is into the magical practices. Jeremy's got a problem with that. I've got a problem with the fact that they try to hide it. So they changed the Doctrine and Covenants from it being, working with the rod and all that sort of a thing, which is a pretty weird way to translate things, by the way. I mean, I can see like looking for water underground, and the thing starts to vibrate when you're near water, like some kind of a, sonar detector of water or something. But translate ancient records, with a stick? I'm sorry, I can't even handle that one. So they changed it and said you have the gift of Aaron in the Doctrine and Covenants instead of, the gift of the rod. Once again, what we've got is altering what the people are going to see in order to make it look more believable. Like I said, Jeremy's got a problem. These guys are into magic. He calls it folk magic. Other people have called it that. I mean, there's all kinds of different ways to... First words you can put in front of magic: white magic, black magic. I'd say it was black magic that he was using when he was sacrificing black animals to these demon guarding spirits of the treasures they were seeking at night. At any rate, they have to keep changing their story. It doesn't look good. And then maybe he gets into the whole seer stone thing here as well. So, Jeremy asks these kind of weird questions like, would you actually believe somebody that told you that he translated the book out of a rock in a hat? Well, Jeremy, what the hell did you think happened? They told you he did it with magic glasses. It's in Ether, the book of Ether. In chapter 3, it describes the magic glasses. So is that like believable, but using something like a crystal ball or a glow-in-the-dark rock isn't? I mean, just because glasses, look like glasses doesn't mean that... I mean, you had to have supernatural power to do this, and he obviously was not an Egyptologist, even though we've got, some ridiculous pictures that the church has chosen to publish, like in the Ensign, with Joseph, taking a look at the plates and checking them out, like what God's giving him direct revelation or something. I'm sure he could have had direct revelation. I mean, what L. Ron Hubbard wrote about using automatic writing. I mean, he was an occultist, disciple of Aleister Crowley, Ordo Templi Orientis, you know, that sort of a thing. He used automatic writing for a lot of his scripture. Why didn't Joseph Smith? Maybe he could have, I don't know, but he had to use a rock and a hat, and that bothers Jeremy more than magic glasses, apparently. I don't know why. But the fact that the church has hidden this, because apparently they didn't want us to think about that. Let's face it, Isaiah says that, you know, peeping and muttering is off limits, and it's what wizards do, and the Bible leads us to believe that magic is not approved of the God of Israel, even though there's magic in the Bible. You've got, you know, Joseph and his divining cup or whatever. You got Moses and Aaron with their magic rod or stick they throw down, it turns into a snake, and the Egyptians, you know, Chaldean guys or whatever, magicians throw down theirs, they turn into snakes. But no, Moses' snake eats their snakes. Yeah, anyway. So there's all kinds of magic stuff in there. If you read you know, Freemasonry, read Freemasonic stuff, you'll see a lot of mixing with Christianity, magic, and Freemasonry. And that's just not the way the Christians want us to view things now, and the book of Isaiah condemns it, and peeping and muttering is what you would do if you're peeping at your peepstone in a hat, and you'd be muttering unless you took your face out of the hat, obviously. So maybe they didn't want us to know about that, so they hide the seer stone for 193 years, or, you know, I don't know, whatever, in their vault. So, and Joseph Fielding Smith denied that they had it, right? I mean, I did a video on that. So the whole thing is these guys are completely dishonest. You've got to believe in supernatural events, in magic or whatever it is, to believe in Mormonism in the first place. I don't know what Jeremy's problem is. You know, he says God appeared to him and he had no problem with that. God came to New York all the way there just to say, hey, this is my beloved son, and then all he does is quote some scripture instead of having an authentic sounding discussion. Doesn't make much sense, but then that's what we got, and somehow we believed it. These witnesses don't look too credible. Joseph Smith discredits them all, you know, counterfeiters, blacklegs, dishonest, blah, blah, blah. Didn't like the fact that they called him an adulterer. Anyway, and then a whole bit about, oh, they never denied it even though they left the church. Of course, why should they say, I lied? I've said that multiple times. Why? They had nothing to gain by saying I lied about this. So, you know, who knows? And Jeremy brings out the fact that, you know, like Oliver Cowdery and Martin Harris had kind of a conflict of interest here. Martin Harris had mortgaged his farm, you know, to print the Book of Mormon, and he lost most of his farm. He lost a bunch of the acreage over this deal that Joseph basically conned him into. So, they wouldn't be the most credible witnesses that you'd probably trying to use if you had a, you know, if you were trying to convince people of things, and then you wouldn't pick all of them out of about, you know, 2 or 3 families either. You know, I'm sure if someone else mentioned something, you know, like what if they had a reputation to risk instead of, you know, who they were, and they didn't. So they are not a very convincing crew, shall I say, and I shall say it in the name of the age of reason. Amen. Like, subscribe, comment, check it out. These guys, you know, Fawn Brody did a lot of writing on these guys. That was pretty interesting. So they're just not, they're not super credible guys, and they all denounce Joseph Smith. And so if you do believe him, he's a fallen prophet. If you don't believe him, it's all BS from the beginning. So where does that leave you? It leaves you with 10% of your gross income left that you didn't have before you were giving it in tithing, plus the rest of your weekends and everything else. So good luck with that. Have a great day. See you in the next video.